But Angie and I were blessed, and I'll say more about this later, but we were blessed to be here from, I think, 1980 to about 80, almost 86, 85, late 85, early 86. Everything in my mind is in football seasons, and so I know where I was for every football season, and so I'm trying to think back during that era. But let me just tell you how much we have grown from being a part of this place. We'll talk about that more because it's not a building. I mean, we didn't grow because of this building. We didn't grow because of what the name of this building is. We grew because of the people that invested in our lives here and the fact that God and His Son Christ did a work in our life here. And so we're going to share a little bit of that in a few minutes. And before I get going, so that I don't get in too much trouble, Angie, please stand up and let everybody see you. This is my sweetheart. Angie and I celebrated our 40th wedding anniversary about a month ago, or 2 months ago, and so we were thrilled that she's put up with me that long. I tried to tell people when I got into coaching, this is proof that I can recruit, and so not any doubt about that. Anyway, we're sitting over here, and I'm just thinking of all the things that happened. And my Rolodex is flipping as fast as it'll flip in my head. And for you young people, a Rolodex is what we used before phones to have addresses and phone numbers, and we actually looked up mailing addresses because there was no such thing as email back then. But you know, again, some familiar faces, but most of y'all have changed. I know Angie and I have not changed, but we know most of you all have. So again, thank you for introducing yourself and seeing us. All right, what I'm going to do today is try to challenge you in a way that I've been challenged recently. And the first part of it, I'm going to bore you by talking about myself. I want to tell you a little bit about my story, my history, because it's going to tie into this place, it's going to tie into you. Then I want to tell you about 3 stories that I think are going to be meaningful. I know they're meaningful to me, and I believe they'll be meaningful to you as well. I grew up in Spiro, Oklahoma, way down in the southeastern part of the state, major metropolitan area, if you didn't know that. But Angie actually moved there in the 7th grade. Her father was a retired Navy, and he came home and brought her. But so she wasn't there when I was in my growing up days. But in Spiro, back in those days, my dad was the coach. And I say the coach because in those days, certainly in small towns, if you were the coach, you were the coach. He coached football. He was the head boys basketball coach. He was the head girls basketball coach. He coached track, and he coached summer baseball. And so I was the middle son of 3 boys born to my mom and dad. And we just, if it could be kicked or thrown or shot or hit with something, that's what we did. I never knew for the longest time when people talked about the seasons of the year being fall and spring. I always thought it was football, baseball, basketball. I didn't know that there were other seasons that people talked about. My mom was a high school English teacher. And because of that, my mom really insisted that we have some culture in our life, that we knew something more than just ball. Now, she will tell you, as Angie can confess, that she was quite an athlete herself. Was really good, but she had a little of that academic stuff too, and so she wanted us to have a little more well-rounded life. And so because of my mom, I took piano lessons for nearly 6 weeks, and then I don't know if it was the teacher or I, but one of us quit after 6 weeks. I always wish I'd been able to play, and especially the guitar and those kind of things. I want to flash forward and just give you a little of the highlights, but growing up in Spiro with a teacher and a coach, what's interesting is we thought we were the rich kids in town. And I can't explain that today, but that probably tells you a little bit about the socioeconomic area that I grew up in. Both of our parents worked, and so it just, you know, we didn't want for anything. I look back and I know we didn't have a lot, but we didn't want for anything. It was just our life. As I moved into about the time Angie moved in the 7th grade, and I started sitting behind her in class and started chasing her around and courting her and all that kind of stuff. I chased her for a whole bunch of years before she let me catch her. But about this, I think it was the 8th grade, was when my dad took the high school principal job. And so I didn't get to play for my dad. He didn't coach me on the school teams, but he still coached me in the living room. He coached me in the backyard. And any of you that have ever moved furniture around to block people out for a rebound would understand what was going on at my house. I moved on into high school as all my brothers, and eventually had my mom in high school English. And I tell people, you've never really lived until you got to take your mom for senior English. Exactly. And then on one particular day, she sends you to see your dad down in the principal's office. Not exactly what I would recommend as a go-to. You know, we had, some of y'all are old enough to remember that the old saying was, well, if you get a paddle in at school, you're going to get one when you got home. Well, this was like triple jeopardy. I mean, I got one at school, and I got one at home for getting one at school. Because he did it all. And so I guess I was physically abused. I didn't realize it at that time. But we all are pretty sure now that that's just, you're not supposed to do that. But somehow it worked. And so I continue to, I'm not saying I've ever spanked my grandkids, but I certainly will threaten them with it. Of course, my grandkids are perfect, so it doesn't really matter. So I'm sure you understand that. I wound up going to the University of Tulsa on a football scholarship. I was very blessed to do that, but because my mom and dad had been involved in education, for some reason they wanted more for us. And I want you to follow this line of thinking. I think we always want more for our kids. And so my mom and dad really never ever encouraged us, almost discouraged us from following them into education. My mom wanted me to be a doctor, a lawyer, something that paid the bills and something we could use that brain and prove to everybody how smart we were. And so when I went to TU, I was a pre-med major for one semester until I got my grades. Then I decided I probably wasn't going to stay in pre-med. Some of y'all will understand that later. But I love biology because I had a teacher in high school that was my favorite teacher. And he happened to have taught biology, and he also happened to have taught all the sciences, because that's the kind of school we were in. And so guess what? Because I had a teacher that I liked and that I thought so much of, I followed his path and went into the sciences and got my degree at Tulsa in biology. Well, that was in the late 70s and early 80s, and there was such a thing back then as the oil boom. And so I thought I was going to get a degree. It was in environmental biology. I was going to go to work for an oil company. I was going to make a whole bunch of money going out doing field studies and doing all that. When they have to go do all the EPA studies when they were going to go do the drilling. And so that was kind of what I was hoping to do. It's interesting how God has other plans. And because of the people that intersected my life when I was in college, my life began to shift. And I began being with men, young men, that were investing in my life that until I came to church here, I didn't know it was called discipleship. I just knew they were meeting with us, that we were studying the Bible, and we were learning verses, and he was taking me different places and teaching me how to speak and share my testimony. I didn't know it was a program. A few years later, after Angie and I get married, we start coming to church here, and Mike Story's the pastor, and we just get discipleship through and through and began to understand how to teach it and do it and be a part of it and how Christ had done that with his guys. So I'm telling you all that I went to work for FCA right out of college. And I enjoyed that. And interestingly, after doing that for 3 years, and by the way, Angie and I are married now, and we're going to church here during that era. And we just finished up from 80 to 83. I'd been working for FCA, and we're doing all kinds of investing in young people and coaches and kind of figuring that out, and we started having kids. And so in 80, 83, and 85, we have our 3 boys, all the while going to church in this place. And so there are many of you here that actually invested in our kids, either by rocking them or holding them or teaching them. And they were all real little. But I'm just telling you, there's great memories in that for us, and it's precious. After 3 years, though, I got a call from a guy I played ball with at Tulsa, and he was now a lawyer in town. And he said, Bill, would you like to be a football coach? You ever thought about that? And I'm like, well, yeah, but what I didn't tell you was I'd become a quarterback. Now, some of y'all don't understand this, but if you're a quarterback, you're really hot stuff. I mean, at least in our own mind, we do things pretty well. And so because I had been a quarterback, and because I kind of wanted to coach, but my mom and dad didn't want me to, I never really pursued it because there's no way I'm going to start out in the 7th grade and do junior high football and work. I'm too good for that. That's really y'all are laughing. I'm telling you, I wouldn't say it out loud because I would know better than to say it out loud, but that's how I felt. Bob called me and he said, no, I've got a better deal. We want you to be our head coach. We've got a little private Christian school here in town. It was Eastwood Baptist at the time, Eastwood Christian School. And he said, we need a football coach and we want you to be the head coach. I'm saying, you want me to be the head coach? He goes, yeah. Now, really what they wanted was a youth director. Seriously, it's what they wanted, but they were needing a football coach because the school, Eastwood, had just split, and a whole bunch of them had gone over to begin what became Metro Christian Academy. And a whole bunch of the players went over to play at Metro. And so I was going to get to coach all the guys that stayed at Eastwood that couldn't play. They didn't say that. But I wanted to coach. And let me tell you, coach them I did. I jumped in and we got after it. And we went 2-8 the first year, won 2 games. And I'm telling you how I could figure out that there were 2 teams worse than us anywhere. I don't know how we did that. But because I'm such a great coach, our record just continued to improve the next year. Because we went 3-7. If you count the forfeit that we got. And I count the forfeit we got. So 2-8, 3-7. And interestingly, this is the true part. I really began to understand that this is what I believe God's made me to do. This is the thing that He put in my life, the people that came into my life, the experiences, all the things that worked together to seemingly put me in this place that this fits. Now, we sang some wonderful hymns, the mountains and all the stuff that we see sometimes, and sometimes it ain't just perfect. So about the time I thought I got it figured out, now by the way, I'm going to church right here. By the time we think we got it figured out, they decide to close the school down. So now I'm unemployed. But boy, God's showing me that He wants me to be a coach. Now something in that scenario doesn't seem to match up. But I'm with the right people, and I continue to walk in faith, and I get a job over at Sepulpa for a year as an assistant coach. And we continue to live here in Prattville, continue to go to church here, continue to grow our kids. And so now I'm teaching and coaching at Sepulpa, and we're getting ready to go on a mission trip. This place was getting ready to go on a mission trip. We were going to Zambia. I'm fired up, man. We're going into the woods, man. We're going into the jungle. We're going into Zambia. I looked it up. We didn't have internet, but I looked it up. And, this is, giraffes and, you look at all the stuff is right next to them in Kenya. And I'm like, that's cool, because a science guy, he'd like to do this. Plus, we're going to have a pretty good resume here, because this is a God thing, right? And you like that for your resume. I go, So I got my shots, I'd done everything, and we're finishing school. Now, there's 3 stories here that all kind of tie together, and we'll come back to it in just a second. All right, so I'm finishing up at Sepulpa, and the coach at Spiro, where I grew up, retires. I'm fired up about this. I need to go back home because this would be good. So I called the superintendent up. And I said, look, I think I ought to be your next head coach. Yeah, thank you. I mean, it doesn't dawn on me that my record so far is 2-8 and 3-7. But I called the superintendent up. He says, you know, we love you. We think the world of you. It's where you grew up. Think you need a little more experience. I said, no, seriously. I think I am exactly the right coach for you. I mean, I played college ball, and my record is going this way. He said, I really think you need more experience. You need more seasoning. I said, Dad, I really want to. True story. True story. And he hired me. Now, picture this. He's in his first year as superintendent. Can you imagine living in the small town where the superintendent just hires his son to come be the football coach who has been 2-8 and 3-7? Wow. I am thankful that I had no idea of the limb that my dad had gone out on. Because I didn't. Because I was sure I would be successful. So I had no idea about that whole scenario. Thankfully for my dad, we were good. And we were able, in 4 years, we took our team to the state championship for the first time. We didn't win it, we lost the game. But it was a fabulous run, and Spiro football was back. And it was all, part of being there and that story. I wound up going from there to Edmond. Went from Edmond to Union. And from Union, we wound up winning some championships. But I want to go back and finish my story about Angus. I didn't get to go to Zambia because I'm finishing at Sapulpa. And at Sapulpa, we had one of those late snows. And in those late snows, we had to add days. It wasn't a teacher walkout, but we had to add days at the end. And so we're at the end of school, and I've got 4 more days than we didn't think we were going to have. And so now I'm going to finish up, and it's going to be after we're supposed to leave for Zambia. No big deal. The superintendent that was at school over there, he went to church at First Baptist in Sapulpa, and he was on the missions board. I'm going to go talk to him. I'm going to tell him I'm going on a mission trip. Surely he'll understand. And he said, well, we have a policy that says we can't approve that at the end of school. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm going to Spiro. I've already accepted the job. I'm not even going to be here next year. He said, all I'm telling you, Bill, is we don't approve that position, that opportunity for you to go. So I'm really torn up about this. I'm talking to our pastor, I'm talking about different people. Some people tell me this, some people tell me that. Bottom line is I did the best I could, and I decided not to go. I just thought I would honor my boss I was working for. My dad had always told me, leave a place better than you found it, don't burn bridges, all that stuff. So I don't remember anything, went to Spiro, didn't make the trip. What's funny is some of those guys even got arrested. And that's a good thing because they got out and everything was good. But I'm like, wouldn't that have been good on my resume? Got arrested for Christ. Didn't even get to go. Nobody ever thought about that again until I was leaving Spiro to go to Edmond. And I interviewed for the superintendent with the superintendent there. And he said, I was hoping you'd call. Because that superintendent was the guy that used to be at Sapulpa or whichever direction I'm pointing. And he was the one that I honored by not going. And so apparently that kept something working. He hired me at Edmond. I couldn't get the job at Union until I'd gone to Edmond. After I went to Edmond, I got the job at Union. We stayed for 14 years. God has a funny plan of the people he comes into your life that he intersects that with. Would you show that first slide for me, please? Miss Janet. State championship this year. Man, they talked about me over at Owassa. I am a championship coach. Brother Paul was awesome. I am a championship coach. They don't tell you that in 88 at Spiro, we went to the championship and lost. And then when I got to Union in 94, we went to the championship and lost. We went again in 98 and lost. We went again in 99 and lost. We went again in 2000 and lost. That doesn't sound like a championship coach. Thankfully, we kept going. And we were able to win a few. But I'm not defined by that. But I want to tell you a couple of stories. okay? And then I want to talk about some of these guys you see in this picture. Go to the next slide, please. Remember that superintendent? I told you he'd been a coach. Now, I know I'm a coach, and this sounds self-serving, but let me tell you, Billy Graham knows this stuff, okay? Billy Graham says, a coach will influence more people in a year than most people do in a lifetime. That's not please don't go there yet. Okay, I want you, because you're going to be these people I'm talking about, if you'll stay with me. Go next slide. You remember that superintendent? My dad that hired me? That's him. I want you to look at that picture for a minute. 4 boys, a mom, there's no dad in that picture. Now, if we were in today, and you were able to look up the stats on the success rate of these guys growing up in that house with no father, and I'm going to tell you some more about that in a minute. I want you to just think about the stats here of what it would say. Because this is actually 4 years from the story I'm going to tell you about my dad. When my dad, older brother, okay, the tall guy in the back, when he was 12, so it's about 4 years prior to this, okay, the littlest brother was a toddler. My dad and his uncle, and my uncle, who's about 18 months apart, are the two kind of, compadres in the middle. My dad had a father who was a drunk, who was alcoholic. All right? Used to come home, used to beat their mom, go back, drink. I mean, this is a story. It's not familiar to some of you, but this was my dad's story. His father would come home, start beating on their mom because he's drunk. He's a mean drunk. When my oldest uncle was 12 years old, he decided he was big enough to stand in between my grandfather and my grandmother to defend his mom. That didn't serve him very well because my grandpa took a horsewhip and beat my 12-year-old uncle. And then he went back to town to go do what he does. That had been enough. I guess when my grandma saw him beat their 12-year-old with the horsewhip, it was enough. She took everything they had and put them in 3 flour sacks. Flour sacks. Most of you don't know what a flour sack is. Just trust me, it's not very big. My dad and his brother carried a flour sack. My grandma carried a flour sack of everything they owned. And big brother carried little brother, who was a toddler. And they walked along the railroad track 4 miles to her sister's house, this house that you see. And that's where they lived. They went on the railroad track because they'd gone on the road before, and Grandpa came home and caught them and brought them back. So this time they took the railroad track, stayed away, finally got to her sister's house, and her husband and she helped raise these 4 boys along with my grandma. Now, some of y'all know these stories. These are not just my stories. My grandma had no education. She had no job. Now, let me tell you the rest of the story. My dad, the guy with the arrow, wound up getting his master's degree. Married my mom. They were married 50-something years before she passed. I told you we thought we were the rich kids in town. You follow me? It wasn't an exception because all 3 of his brothers all got their master's degrees, all became coaches except for the youngest. The youngest one became a teacher, a music teacher, led music in church. They all raised their kids. They all stayed with their kids. They all stayed with their parents. They changed a generation of Blankenships. Now, how did my grandma do that? How did she do that? You know, when they sat around and told stories, here's what they said. She had no education. She had no formal way of doing this. She did 2 things. She kept us in church, and she kept us in school. Now, I want you to follow that now. She kept us in church, and she kept us in school. Along the way, they'll tell you stories about the guy at the 5 and dime that gave them a pair of tennis shoes so that they could play basketball. Then they'd tell you a story about the person at church that made sure they had another set of clothes, or this or that. And then there was another person at church that owned the feed store that would hire them to come work at the feed store. Now, there's just all these connections when you hear the stories. Okay? Now, I want you to go back and think about the odds. And remember what Billy Graham said, a coach can impact more people in a year than most people do in a lifetime. My dad, two of my uncles, and I would even dare say the music teacher probably had the same story. Would you agree? Okay. Go to the next one, please. I want to tell you about some of the coaches I get to work with. There's one that kind of looks like Santa Claus back there at the back. Okay, I want to tell you his story for a minute. He grew up in Turley, okay, major metropolitan area. Turley. Paul is a generation removed from my mom and dad and me. Okay, I actually got to coach Paul when he was growing up in Spiro. But before that, Paul had been in Turley, and he had a dad like my dad's dad. His dad eventually left, and his mom went a little bit cuckoo for a while, and so she's having all kinds of parties and drugs and all that stuff, and he would sneak across the street to climb up in the cab of a semi to sleep so he wouldn't have to be in the apartment with the parties. That's what he remembers. She eventually found a new boyfriend. For some reason, the boyfriend had it together and said, we're going to move to Spiro. He thought they meant Sperry. So he got in the car and started driving, and kept driving and driving and driving and driving, and wound up in Spiro. He didn't know where he was. Let me tell you the story. People in church, people in school, impacted his life. He finished, got his degree. You know what he wanted to do? He wanted to go coach. You know where he went to coach? Spiro. Because that's where people had invested in his life. And now he's given back. And I know what Billy Graham says. I'm thankful that we got him up and he's coaching at Owasso now. All right, go to the next one. All right, see Santa Claus way back there at the back? That's him, that's Paul. This was after our state championship game. Those two guys holding the trophy are brothers. One was a junior and one was a freshman. And I think that's cool that these brothers are growing up. Well, Paul is their coach, their position coach. I'm the head coach. Paul's their position coach. I don't know why he's photobombing, but he is. But even more funny, I think, are the two little guys down here that are photobombing. Those are my grandsons. They want to be in the picture. Now, here's what I want you to catch. What Paul had to go through, what my dad had to go through, my grandsons have no clue. I have no clue. I had no clue. My kids had no clue. Not that we didn't learn about it, that's what I'm saying, but we didn't grow up with the same issues because people had invested in my dad, and that changed generations. You with me? Generations. Go to the next picture. I want to tell you about this guy with the bald head. Okay, that's Antonio. Antonio is another young man that just has another one of these stories. Grew up in Alabama. He was born to a 14-year-old mother. Okay, he had a stepfather come in that was a police officer. They had 3 more kids, so Antonio is the oldest of 4 and is kind of becoming that, you know, how you are if you're the oldest. And something happened, they split up. And so the police officer who had been Antonio's stepfather left. So he's kind of trying to hold it all together. Mom, who had him when she was 14, decided it's time to start being a teenager. And now she's in her 20s. So she goes a little crazy. These stories, you hear about them all the time. It's not unique. She gets in trouble, is going to go away. And so the 4 kids go to live with Grandma. Long story short, Grandma gets sick, she gets ill, she passes, and now the stepdad comes back to pick up the kids because they got nowhere else to go. They're going to go in the system. Good dude that he is, he takes his 3, but doesn't take Antonio. So Antonio's going to go into the system until they track down his father that he's never met in his life, living in Tulsa. So they ship him to Tulsa to live with his father. Turns out, actually, it was a pretty good story. Antonio's father had a job. He took care of his business. He had some money put away. He was in construction, so it was seasonal. So he would do enough to get him through the winter and then get back to work. And so that's how Antonio was being raised now for a couple of years. They moved him from North Tulsa, the dad did, to Union in the 9th grade when I'm coaching at Union. I don't know Antonio. He's just a 9th grader. He's just a kid on our team. They're going to go see their family back in Alabama at Christmas time. So the dad tells Antonio, you get your stuff ready. I'm going to go deliver these Christmas presents. We'll be back. We're going to head out. This is a couple of days before Christmas. His dad is shot and killed on a porch delivering Christmas presents. True story. True story. Now, let me tell you this about this young man. He's so afraid that he's going in the system, he won't tell anybody. He lives in that apartment as a 15-year-old by himself because his dad had paid the bills. And he's got all this, and because they just moved to Union, nobody knew. This was just something that happened in North Tulsa. They didn't know. This is Antonio. He comes to school every day, doing what he's supposed to do. Finally, after 6 or 8 weeks, an English teacher, a counselor, and a coach figured it out. And so, instead of getting him shipped back, they began to influence him, began to invest in him. Antonio's a little behind. He winds up becoming the captain of our team his senior year. Now, you don't just get captain. You have to earn that. That's the kind of young man he was. He got a chance to go to Pitt State on a scholarship, except his academics were a little bad. So he had to sit out a year. All he did was finish his degree at Pitt State. You know what he wanted to do when he got out? He wanted to coach. He wanted to go back to Union where he'd grown up and wanted to invest in those kids. In the meantime, I've taken a job at the University of Tulsa. And God's blessed me, and Angie and I get to serve as the head coach there. And so I asked Antonio, you want to come work as a graduate assistant coach? Well, that's not a great job, but it's a good learning thing for him, and he did. And he came to work for us as a GA. Now, what's interesting, if you're an OU or OSU fan, I say this to you in all love, our guys have to go to school, okay? At Tulsa, Antonio could not be a graduate assistant without literally taking grad classes and working on his master's. He worked with us 3 years and finished with a master's degree from the University of Tulsa. Wow. And then you know what he wanted to do? Go back and coach. He was at Union when I got hired at Owasso, and I talked him into coming to Owasso to work with me. And do you think our kids have a lot of excuses to tell him about? He's like, come on now. I mean, he's lived through it. Go to the next couple of pictures here. This is him with one of our guys. Go on. Some more of our guys. And again, if I told you those guys' stories, you'd understand that, you know, everybody's got stories.
That's right.
Go to the next one. This guy, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but this young man from Union, Kevion Cooper, that if you follow the news, when Owasso and Union played the first time and went to double overtime, we won, but this kid had a traumatic brain injury that happened was in ICU, was all kinds of stuff. He's going to OU on a track scholarship. Antonio was at our house. We were having, well, I mean, we even got beat, but we're eating, and we eat the pain away anytime we have a loss. So we're eating, and we're kind of, you know, rehashing things, and we get a call from Coach Frederick, the coach, and he said the family wants Antonio because Antonio had invested in Kevion when he'd been coaching him at Union. I don't know if you're following all this.
Yes.
But Antonio, we go to the hospital because Antonio is influencing that young man and investing in his life. And when he was in ICU, his family wanted Antonio to be there. Just saying. Continuing to impact. Let's go to the next one. All right, you remember my dad and his brothers. Well, the little brother's not in this one. Or I'm sorry, the big brother's not in this one. This is my dad, his brother of about 18 months, and then the toddler. These are the guys. All right, his closest brother, okay? Sometimes we just think it's all about us. Go to the next picture. This guy's coaching with me, and he is my dad's brother's grandson. Doing what? Investing, giving back, impacting young people. He wouldn't be there if somebody had not done something for my dad and his brothers. Are you with me? Okay. And now he's doing the same thing as these guys. Zach doesn't have an excuse. He doesn't know any different. He's like my boys. He's 2 generations removed. But he's raising twins, and he and his wife are in church, and they're growing. Now that doesn't mean everything is easy for us. You see, we still have issues. Okay? The difference is, when my dad was growing up, they didn't have others around them. Now that we have a faith family, when we have issues, we have people to walk with us. And we have people to go through with us, and we have a chance for healing. And we're seeing that consistently in our life and in our Angie and my family. That's the same statement one more time. Go to the last one. Every one of those boys in that picture has a story. Now I circled, I don't know if you can see them, there's yellow circles around those 3 guys I told you their story, because I'm not even in that picture. I'm way back to the back, but it didn't matter to me. I'm celebrating them, their lives. And don't get me wrong, winning's a whole lot better than losing. I love winning. But it's investing in lives. When our boys went off to college, we prayed consistently. I prayed, Lord, please have people intersect their life that are going to impact them, to bring them towards you. That's what happened in my life. I was raised by great parents. I was in church, and I'm telling you, it still mattered who came into my life, who impacted me. And each of these have a story. When we talk about history, I talk about my history, and I don't think it's history. I think it's his story. It's his story that he's writing in us. You start thinking about where you are in this idea. Okay? I've been studying and reading in the book of Kings, and I think it's really important that you understand this, because the fact that I got it together because my dad got it together doesn't make it perfect. Okay? In the book of Kings, I would challenge you to go through and just, every time you read about a king, write out beside it, good king or bad king. Good king, bad king. Because it tells you. He either followed God or he didn't. It's very clear in Kings that good kings have good sons. Good kings beget good sons. Good kings also beget bad kings and bad sons. What about bad kings? Bad kings have bad kings. Bad kings also have good kings. Now, I have to believe with all my heart that God uses others to cross over and to intersect our life to help us make a difference. You see, when you look at those individuals, this is what I did for years. I used to look at, I'm like, man, I want to help that kid. He's in need. He doesn't have much. I want to make a difference for that guy. Boy, what a shallow view. Need to understand is it's generational. You see, if I can get that one kid to do something like my dad did, maybe he'll be a guy that breaks the cycle. Maybe he'll be a man that'll stay by his family, that'll stay by his wife, that'll stay with his kids, that'll be a man making a difference in the community that he grows up in. And then guess what? He's going to have kids that have a dad like that. And then they're going to be grandkids that have a grandpa like that. But see, I used to think about it so small that it was just one person. And man, I began to see God's story of how he impacts generations for his glory. 2 Corinthians 5:17 says this. Therefore, if any man is in Christ, he is a new creature, new creation. He is a new person. Those statistics that we looked at, those statistics don't define you if you are a new person. So whether you, as moms and dads in here, boys and girls, whether you're in that first generation and you've got to overcome the abuse and the things that happen, there are those of you in here. There are those of you in here that are second generation or third generation. It doesn't end, but let me tell you, doing it together, walking the faith road together, sure gives us a better chance to continue to survive and grow and thrive, and God will be glorified in it. So that's my challenge to you. I hope you've gotten a little picture. In my life, it's about what I'm seeing played out. And let me tell you, it's not me. I hope I'm being faithful, but I hope that I know that God is strong enough, even when I'm not faithful, to use others. And so I want to ask you today, as we pray, I want you to figure out where you are. Where you are in this generational, do you need to be the one that starts the spiritual move in this generation? Or do you need to be the one that continues the spiritual work in our generation? And then who do you know? Let's say you've got a faithful family. Who do you know? Who do you see that you can be the hands and feet of giving that kid the pair of tennis shoes that somebody gave my dad? Giving that guy, my dad, a job or a way to find his way and to be encouraged. Because you have those opportunities. The problem is most of us aren't intentional about it. Where are you investing? Who are you investing in? I would ask that as we pray that you would really think through that. Let's